Welcome to part 3 or like 7, who knows, of my Imperfect Victim series on Britney Spears. Today we are addressing one of the gravest systemic evils in pop culture history, which is the Britney Spears conservatorship. Once again, this is a heavy topic. We're exploring themes of coercive control, institutional trauma, and systemic abuse, so please take care while listening. What followed Britney's breakdown was framed as care, protection, and treatment. A tragic but necessary intervention for a woman who had lost herself and who was out of control. But when you look closely on how the conservatorship functioned, who benefited, who lost power, who gained financially, and who was silenced, that entire story collapses. This was a system that was designed to extract labor, suppress resistance, and permanently erase autonomy under the language of concerned, guised as a system designed to help heal a vulnerable person, which is the opposite of what it did. This episode is about how the institutions meant to protect Britney Spears instead became the machinery that imprisoned her, and why calling that care was one of the most disgusting and heinous lies pop culture has ever told. So let's get started. Before we get into the details of the Britney Spears conservatorship, I want to start off in a similar way that Britney started off her memoir, which I thought was a very important and poignant thing to do. She started off by telling us the story of her grandmother, Emma Jean Spears. Her grandmother, Emma Jean Spears, lost her newborn child shortly after birth and subsequently had a breakdown. And her grandfather had her institutionalized and chemically restrained with lithium until Emma Jean eventually took her own life on the grave of her deceased son. Yeah. It did not start with Britney. This was a generational thing. Jamie Spears was not a stable or protective presence in Britney's childhood. He was an alcoholic. He was abusive. He was a parent who did not meaningfully raise her or safeguard her or help her with her emotional development. He was a source of instability and turmoil in her life, and also a vessel of really horrific generational trauma that was like passed down. If you hear what happened to Jamie's mother, it makes sense the way that he ended up treating his own daughter. Anyway, all this is allegedly for entertainment purposes only. It's just my opinion, okay? So for Britney, growing up without a secure male attachment figure is a vulnerability that really shaped the way that she was able to tolerate coercive dynamics, as we've discussed in terms of Kevin Federline, Justin Timberlake, Sam Lufty, right? And her father, Jamie Spears re-entered her life precisely when she was at the most psychologically fragile and publicly vilified. It basically was in order for him to transfer control, authority, and ownership over her life. And this mirrors a familiar trauma cycle that happens to a lot of people, where the original source of harm or abuse returns under the guise of protection, only to reassert dominance. The conservatorship was also a deliberate engineering thing. It was basically designed as a highly specific legal structure that stripped her of her autonomy while preserving the ability to generate profit. And the entire legal system was in on it. And this arrangement was strategically constructed by her father in coordination with other industry actors and also legal, medical, and industrial sign-off who helped, and all of those systems which profited greatly from Britney's captivity. The speed and breadth at which her rights were removed was honestly astounding. It was an institutional capture and a hostile takeover of an innocent human being's life just because she had a few low moments in the setting of getting a divorce and losing the custody of her children. One of the most disgusting things about the Britney Spears conservatorship is that she was denied the right to her own legal counselor, which is a fundamental violation of due process. Adam Streisand tried to represent her, but he was told that she did not have the capacity to pick her own lawyer. She was instead represented by this attorney, Sam Ingham III, name them, okay, who basically was functionally aligned with the conservatorship and whose whole purpose was to maintain her captivity. And so she had no independent legal voice actually advocating her and challenging the structures that were controlling her. And on top of it, Judge Penny, name her, continued to issue rulings that basically expanded the control over her body, her finances, and her label without any real scrutiny. Also, the psychiatrists that were involved were part of it as well, because she had these psychiatric evaluations that were of questionable ethics that were basically used to justify indefinite captivity. The Britney Spears conservatorship in totality really raises a chilling and sobering reality about the evils of the mental health care system and how labeling someone as mentally unstable can be weaponized against them to strip them of their rights. It's quite disturbing if you really reflect on it. What ended up happening was operationalized imprisonment by the legal system, which should never happen to any human being, but happens every day to people who are less famous than Britney Spears. She lost bodily autonomy, including control over medical decision making. She had an IUD forced into her body, and she was unable to have children during the last of her fertile years. She lost her financial autonomy, even though she was the sole generator of income and her estate's wealth. And she lost legal autonomy and was not able to hire counsel or enter any contracts or make any legal decisions. She also lost privacy because she was surveilled like animal by this disgusting security system that her family hired. And she was not treated as a person, but basically as a piece of property that was managed by others. She basically lived under total surveillance. All of her phone communications were monitored, and her private messages were basically accessed without her consent. Her iCloud was surveilled, and she had no basically way of communicating privately to anyone because she had daily institutional oversight. And she was not allowed, her visitors were monitored, her movements were monitored, and worse, the most disgusting thing is that her children were weaponized against her. It was repeatedly used as leverage in order to bend her into submission because it was her one weakness and her one thing that she desired in her life, which is to be a mother and have children. Were basically a reward for obedience, and while resistance was met with isolation. And Kevin Federline continued to benefit from her child support payments all the way up until the children turned 18, which the last one just turned 18 like a year ago. So the child support payments just stopped, if you can imagine that. She was also forcibly medicated with powerful psychiatric medications against her will, and chemical restraints were basically used to suppress resistance, allegedly for entertainment purposes only. And all of her emotions were pathologized, and she was constantly painted as a villain. You can see that in Jamie Lynn Spears' book, and no one read Kevin Federline's stupid-ass book, but you could see it in his book as well. Supposedly, not that I would know because I didn't read that shit. Okay. And the mental health system, rather than serving as a source of healing, was basically a tool of domination and imprisonment. She was treated basically entirely as a financial asset by Jamie Spears. Her father, as I've mentioned before, referred to her as a workhorse, basically revealing that he literally saw her as an animal. And this also was really revealing of the underlying logic of the conservatorship. Britney was forced to perform, tour, and rehearse under threat of punishment or removal of even more autonomy, despite any exhaustion or refusal. And her trauma became monetized content, and her captivity became profitable. The conservatorship, the real reason why people got wind of the horrors of the conservatorship, was after she refused to do another Vegas residency, where she walked out and stood in silence, and they locked her in a mental institution. And one of the people actually reported what happened to the press. And that was actually what started the information that resulted in the Free Britney movement. Shockingly enough, that is really what happened. I truly do, and this is a matter of my opinion, allegedly for entertainment purposes only, this is my opinion exclusively, but I really don't think that they expected her to live. I don't think they expected her to survive it. And I think it was actually designed for her to give up the will to live. I think that the structure of control intensified over time, basically moving towards total erasure of her autonomy, her voice, and her identity. And honestly, there's a lot of profit to be made from an estate post-mortem, where the person isn't around to be a pesky person needing to have their funds appropriately allocated to them. You can really control the narrative when somebody's there. And in narcissistic family structures, sometimes that is the goal, to drive the child or to not being here anymore, because it's a way of controlling the narrative. And I want to note that this can happen consciously or unconsciously, but typically the outcome is still the same. Ultimately, I think that the Free Britney movement actually saved her life, right? It was basically a movement that exposed the reality of her captivity, and the grassroots scrutiny made the legal and media apparatus basically start to recoil and also step back because they didn't want to go down with the ship of the conservatorship. I think that really part of the reason why Free Britney happened and was so effective and pervasive was because of COVID. It basically slowed the machinery enough for people to finally pay attention and actually start asking questions and take the time to actually look into what was going on and see the blatant corruption that was very, very obvious under public scrutiny. But I think that there are people, lawyers, judges, accountants, whose reputations were at risk and under scrutiny, and whose licenses were at risk as well. So as such, the conservatorship needed to fold, and all the injustices were desiccated and scattered like the rats they were under the light of day. But that said, by the time she was free, I think in some ways it was too late. The damage to her mind was profound, and the tools that would actually help her get better were actually weaponized against her during the conservatorship. So how would she really be able to establish trust and a rapport with a therapist, given the way psychiatric help was weaponized against her? Trauma patients already at baseline have difficulty with trust, and for Britney, having the mental health system weaponized against her is an additional barrier that she would have to face, allegedly. Obviously, I don't know her, so I don't really know what's going on. But I think ultimately extreme trauma makes you reactive, paranoid, afraid, and makes it intensely difficult to connect or trust anyone in relationships, specifically a therapeutic relationship. I also think another thing that was stripped from her was her artistry. Her art, her music, and her dance was a way of her expressing herself and a way of her self-healing. It was weaponized as a tool of control against her. So the very way that she was able to express herself was used as the bars of her captivity. And it was used to entrap her. So basically she was a bird with her wings totally clipped. At the end of the day, I truly think the fact that Britney is alive and survived the type of abuse that she did is honestly extraordinary. And it speaks to what a strong and resilient and powerful and incredible woman she truly is. I think that her dances are beautiful. I think that she is dancing towards freedom, not just legal freedom, but mental freedom. And I hope that she gets it one day. I truly, truly do. In conclusion, Britney was exploited and imprisoned under the language of care. She was surveilled, controlled, financially extracted from, chemically restrained, and legally erased. And what happened to her was captivity, plain and simple. It is a human rights violation. That is what happened. She had her human rights violated. And it was institutionalized abuse, basically made palatable through medical and legal channels. And basically, it shows how easily the system can strip a human beings of their rights under the guise of care for mental illness, and how dangerous that stripping really can be. And Britney Spears is not the only one experiencing this. There are millions of people, thousands of people in conservatorships who are still experiencing this without the public scrutiny to basically make the rats scatter away, where people are extracting and profiting from them till this day. So what do I think Britney deserves now? Peace and fucking quiet. Peace and quiet. Safety, privacy, dignity, joy, and artistry. She deserves to dance without explanation and without judgment, and she deserves to heal on her own terms. The journey for healing is incredibly arduous and painful and difficult and long, but she deserves an opportunity to do it on her own terms in whatever way she sees fit. It might be messy, it might be ugly, it might be painful, but in that pain and in that mess is beauty, is a human being reclaiming their humanity and reclaiming their sense of identity that was stolen from them from literally a teenage years, for almost 30 years, honestly. Above all else, once again, we need to leave Britney alone. And I say that with as much seriousness as I possibly can. After everything that she has given us and the world, the bare minimum she is owed is to be left alone and left to heal in fucking peace. All right. That's the end. I hope you guys, I don't know if you enjoyed it, but I hope you learned something from this. And I'll see you on the next one.